All right. Good afternoon or morning, everyone, depending on what time zone you're in. Welcome to our Day Health Strategies second session of Expert Insights and How to Lead Through the Coronavirus Crisis. Say that fast 10 times. We are here today, again, to provide some lessons that we have learned along the way through the crisis management that we've done, both personally and professionally. And I think it takes all of the resources we've ever had and needed to bring to bear to get through this particularly unprecedented time. So I am Rosemarie Day. I am the founder of Day Health Strategies, and with me is Sarah Matusik, who is a principal with our firm. I believe she's with me. She's going to be logging in. All right. And so just to give you a couple housekeeping things, we really want to present some critical information, but not overload you. So we have a few slides to share, which are queued up and ready to go, but you shouldn't have to be taking copious notes. We are recording this, and we are providing the information on our website, dayhealthstrategies.com, after the session. So that is there for you as well. And there's Sarah. Say hello, Sarah. Good morning in Spokane, Washington. So we are wanting to make this interactive as well, because part of what's needed during this time is for people to really be able to communicate, particularly as we are isolated or quarantined with our families. So it's important for us to be able to communicate professionally, and Zoom provides such a great medium for that. So we want to leave time for questions and answers and discussion as well. So it's just a 30-minute session. We'll be doing these weekly, at least through this quarantine period, and then we'll see where we are and what folks need. So that is my quick overview. I want to dive in to the first slide. And by the way, as we move to the first slide, when I say interactive, there's also the chat feature. So please don't hesitate to type in any questions or thoughts as we go. And we will also, through our wonderful consultant here, Maria, will be providing links and resources real time as well. All right. So for those of you who might have missed our first session, I'm just going to give you the summary slide and some quick highlights so that we can all be on the same page as to how we're thinking about this crisis. The crisis is really a landscape scale crisis, so it means it is bigger than any one organization. It is societal, and in fact, as we all know very well at this point, it is global. That said, there are typical stages of a crisis. So the graph on top shows the different stages, and we are in the response stage right now, response and moving into management. Especially through this quarantine period. And with the advent of more testing and all of that, I think soon we'll be more squarely into this management phase. But that means we're moving into a stage where things are going to get worse before they get better. So I think the red colors are kind of apt at this point. And then where we will ultimately land is recovery. And that will be, some months from now. Nobody can exactly pinpoint when, but that's where we are. We're in a landscape scale crisis. We wanted last week to juxtapose with that the Kubler-Ross grief cycle, and many people are familiar with that when they experience the death of a loved one. If you go to counseling or you read books about it, this is really a very common framework for how for the stages of grieving, and so. We know that it's familiar, and a lot of folks are saying that what we're going through as we react personally to this landscape scale crisis is that we are going through these stages of grieving. And as we pointed out last week, they're not necessarily a linear progression. You can kind of go back and forth from anger to bargaining, depression, over to anger again, depending on what latest announcement you got. But we are going through that individually and collectively. We also pointed out that there's been a sixth stage of grief defined, and that's finding meaning. So for those of us who like to try and look ahead to what happens after this? Like, we will survive this, folks. I can guarantee you there will be a pain along the way. I can also guarantee you, and I think people are well aware of that, but anytime you come through really hard times, beyond acceptance of a new normal, there's also trying to make meaning of that. And that's something that we will want to be talking about through our sessions, because it's something to, I think, be able to start thinking about maybe at the back of your mind. It's maybe too much for right now, but it's, to me, it feels like a little bit of a hopeful piece of all of this. And I always want to hold out hope. So that's a quick recap of the frameworks that we put forward last week, followed by what we call the 3 C's. So on the next slide, and I actually last week, I think I just held up my little handout, but now we put it on a slide. We see that as you need to address the crisis, both at the landscape level and then how you're managing through it at your personal level, we want to keep it real simple. You need compassion, you need connection, and you need some sense of control. So we're going to go through each one of those today and build upon some of the concepts we laid out last week. And we're going to toggle between your professional perspective and your personal, because they really are very blended right now. So compassion, again, remember, means for yourself and for others. Connection is with others. And then control is that sense of having some kind of control over your destiny or your circumstances. And all of those are things that when you're leading, you've got to be coming up with strategies, both at that personal level and then at your organization level. So we'll start, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to elaborate on these with some additional resources we wanted to bring to you.
Right, thank you. Everyone, can you hear me okay, Rosemary?
Yes. Oh, and I should have tested. Does everybody hear me okay?
Ooh. Yes, I can hear you. Great. Zoom 101. So this slide that we put in front of you feels a little busy, but it's very helpful. We have the link at the bottom, and we will have the link on our website as well. This framework comes from a McKinsey article. Our colleagues over there have a wonderful framework for how to respond as a leader to a landscape scale crisis, which is what we're in right now. And this is very helpful for professional mindset as you walk through this crisis in your organizations. We're going to just highlight the first two. And if you do click on the link or read the article, you'll notice that the 5 items that are on this slide are in a different order in the article, and that's fine. We're going to discuss the first 2 on this slide today, and you'll notice that they're in a different order in the article. We just thought that these were the most important to talk through first, really. So Rosemary's going to be walking through empathy, and I'm going to be talking through the communication. And then in further weeks, we're going to be talking through the networks of teams, how to elevate leaders, and then how to make decisions amid uncertainty. That said, we really do think that this is a very nice framework for professionals to think through as a leader as you're going through crisis. And really the thing to think through at, sort of globally above all of this is really to recognize that, your company or your organization really is facing a crisis. I think that's the first thing to think about as a leader. It's very difficult, especially during, the time that we're in, but really recognizing that this time is a global crisis and an organizational crisis is a really helpful thing to think about as a leader, just at base level. And then these are some of the steps that you can walk through as a leader to think through how you can respond as a leader to what's going on right now, whether you feel like you're in an immediate crisis or whether it's coming down the road. These are really helpful to walk through. So Rosemary's going to talk through the first which we think is the highest priority, really, that you should place on your organization, which is to demonstrate empathy. And then I'll talk through how to communicate effectively, is what we'll do today.
Right. So demonstrating empathy really ties in with our first C, which is compassion. And so the thing that people are going through may not be immediately obvious to you if you're thinking about your employees, because if you've been able to maintain their paychecks, you haven't had to lay anybody off or furlough them, as of yet. That doesn't mean they're not being affected by the fact that that's happening to other people. And so, what you see, and of course, we're also all working virtually, so that managing by walking around and the kind of things that you may be used to doing to take a temperature or take a pulse, you have to convert that to virtual, because you've got to get a read on how people are doing. And you have to remember that it's not just, of course, that what's immediately happening within your own company's sphere. All of our circles of life are like overlapping right now as we're confined to our home space. So the personal is very much affecting the professional. It probably goes without saying at this moment. And the personal is very attenuated. It's not just your immediate family, but it's friends and others who you are maintaining connection with, hopefully during this time. And it is inevitable that some really difficult things are going to happen. So between job loss, illness, and even death, as we start to see the numbers being projected, we are all going to know people who are going to be deeply hurt by this crisis. If not ourselves directly, it's going to be one degree of separation. So maintaining empathy for that and addressing the fact that there's human tragedy, and there's also just a real need to go back to survival, kind of like making sure, and particularly for folks who maybe aren't used to living on the economic edge, who find themselves there now and aren't familiar with all the tools and supports. Fortunately, the federal government is stepping up and providing a lot more things very rapidly. So that's good news. But again, a lot of people aren't used to needing to go and file for unemployment or figure out what to do with their health insurance. So that survival necessity is right there front and center for people either immediately or perhaps one step removed from them. So being empathetic to that and recognizing you've got to meet people where they are. And at the same time, keeping yourself, able to take all of that in, because that's a lot of other people's pain. And so you have to do some of the self-care, which we'll get to at the end. But some leaders' strategies is to almost go into is to hunker down and try and even go into the bunker a little bit themselves. And that is not going to be helpful to your organization. And so you've got to have some strategies to keep yourself out there and open and communicating. And I'm going to use that as my segue to Sarah, who will talk about what that takes.
Yep. Yes, so communication is the second, and this feeds into our theme of connection, our second C from last week, if you recall. So communication is critically important, as you all are all aware. There are multiple articles right now about how to communicate during this crisis, but really there are two things that leaders can do that sometimes go wrong during crisis communication. The first is to not communicate at all. That does sometimes happen. And the second is to not communicate in a transparent manner. And so those are the two things that we would like to just push forward to correct in this communication that we're giving to you right now. So, what leaders can do to communicate transparently is really to just make sure that you're giving folks the information about what you know, about what you don't know, and then about what you are doing to bridge the gap between what you don't know and what you don't know. And that will go a long way towards transparent communication. Folks in organizations will respond really well to that if you're very clear about that. The second is just to communicate frequently. More communication is much better than less. and certainly much better than none at all. And so we understand that facts are emerging, that folks are sort of grappling with what's going on right now and what that means and what that's going to mean for your organization. But communicating in a transparent manner is critically important right now, as folks are very aware of what's going on globally and are very concerned about what that means for them personally. And so understanding that as a leader and communicating in a way that addresses the concerns that, people have in your organization is very important. And so we have on this slide, practicing bounded optimism as a key point. And, that means that you don't want to, just be overly confident or upbeat in tone without anything to back that up. And so, being optimistic about what's going on or what will happen in your organization is very critically important. That said, being real and honest is also important, and folks will really pick up on that. And so bounded optimism is the first thing that's very important. And then addressing concerns and questions is also important. Having a, town hall with a question and answer series is, a thing that lots of companies do, and that's very helpful. Or having, if you're a large organization, having a Q&A, written down and on a website is helpful, or, putting that out in an email. Communication is also very helpful. I'm just giving some pragmatic examples of what this could look like. That said, what we're really trying to communicate to you is that communicating effectively really means to the person on the receiving end to be optimistic within reason and be frequent with those communications, and then addressing questions and concerns as they come up is also important. So those three things are really, really important. And we'll move on to those next three. And
actually, I'll throw in, before we move on to that next slide, just one thing. So communicating frequently, and also really picking like a time of day that you're going to do that. People need routine. And so if you were to say like 8 a.m., I'm going to have a message to employees, or always on Fridays, may have an availability. I think during this time to create some structure and consistency really does help people who feel like we're just in complete chaos. And so even if you had nothing to say new the next day, but just to be out there and say, well, we don't know any more than we did yesterday, but here's what we're working on or continuing to, that's even reassuring. So don't get stressed about, I don't have all the answers, I don't have something new. Just being out there consistently is reassuring. So I would really encourage you to do that.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so we want to move on to the next of our 3 C's, which is control. And this goes back to something Sarah had shown you on a Post-it note last week and now is ready to elaborate on.
Right, so you may recall I held up a piece of paper that had a circle within a square. And so this is the circle within a square diagram. Mindset is critically important right now in organizations and personally. We've all seen that as time goes on and as weeks roll on. I think many of us are in the 3rd week right now of what we call social distancing. It's really helpful to put a framework around this so that we can keep our lanes, if you will. And so last week I showed you a square that contained all of the things, and then inside that square was a circle. And in the circle are things that you can control. So focus on those things. And then outside of that circle are things that you cannot control. And those things are things that will come across your desk or come into your mind, but you can't control them. And it does take up a lot of mental space and a lot of emotional or even professional space. But if you can't control them, it's not really helpful to dwell on them and to try to manage them. And so we find this to be a really helpful exercise for folks to actually do, to get a piece of paper and to write down inside of a circle, the things that you can control right now. And this is an example of, COVID-19. There are, turning off the news is something you can do personally, limiting your social media, the way that you exude kindness, for example, the way that you practice social distancing are things that you can control. And things that you cannot control are, how others react. We mentioned this last week. The actions of others are things that you cannot control. And writing this down in, related to the crisis that we're in right now or related to other things in your life is also really helpful. But we wanted to make sure that you had a real example of what this could look like. And so we, Rosemary and I, would like for everyone that is participating in this call or watching this video to practice this in real time. And so the idea is, after this session to, take a piece of paper and just write these things down. And it may sound silly, but it really is helpful to go through the exercise itself. And then we're actually going to build on this next week because we have even more to add to this. So that's a little plug for coming back. But this is the thing that we find to be really helpful personally and professionally, because you could actually have two, distinct pieces of paper that include how you're responding and what you can control in your personal life and how you are responding and what you can control in your professional life right now. And we also would like to acknowledge that the two are merged in a lot of ways for most people as you're trying to work from home.
So the question on the far right there says, how long will this last? And for me, that's one of the most stressful things because I'm such a planner, and to not have that end date, to know that with certainty, and to know that actually there may not even be a total end date. There will be some kind of coming out of this in a phased and somewhat muddled fashion. That doesn't feel good to folks like me who are, like I say, planners. But, that mantra of one day at a time and really, setting up your structure for that day and going through that day and then another day and another day, that can actually be reassuring and helpful. As organizational leaders, of course, we have to do some planning, but you can get very spun up in that. And sometimes you've got to just take those deep breaths and go to something simpler. So I want to go to the next slide. I had said last week that I was going to start meditating. So I will say that I've downloaded the app for meditation, and I took a very long walk with a dear friend to celebrate her birthday. Usually we go to a brunch, and that obviously wasn't an option. So we decided to go on a walk through the forest, and these are my pictures from last Saturday. And she's a strong proponent of meditating, so I felt like I got that much closer to meditating. And in fact, in doing this walk through the forest, it had a lot of the components of meditation. And on top of that, I learned from her that there's such a thing called a forest bath. So in terms of your own health, mental health, and self-care, I want to strongly encourage you to find a way to get outdoors. And this forest was actually only about, I live in a very urban area, and this was less than 30 minutes from my house. So you don't have to, go to the deep woods of northern Minnesota or something. You can probably find a place near your own dwelling and find a bunch of trees you can look up at. But they apparently exude some chemicals that help you with your health and well-being. And so we have some articles about that if you want to read more, but that was one of my big learnings from last week, is just how restorative a walk through the forest can be, whether you're on your own or you're with a friend. So I'll leave you with that image, and we would like to open it up at this point for some, we'll go back, Maria, and we'll do a little Q&A, and then we'll just use that as our closing slide. But if there's any questions that have come in through the chat, Maria, you want to share some?
We have a question actually from last week that we didn't have time to get to. I thought we could open with that. It was, how do we combat fatigue over the measures already in place? already seeing people not practicing social distancing, seeing it as too difficult.
Yeah. So in terms of fatigue, this is a time to absolutely try to get more sleep and do more self-care. And so this week's answer for me would be that forest bath. I could not believe how restorative that was to spend an afternoon that way. And I usually think of myself as more of a beach than a woods person. So, but that getting outdoors like that was amazing. And it just helps you shift your perspective and to be very present. And that's what a lot of therapists are saying, is that when you feel like things you can't control are kind of closing in on you, trying to just take these deep breaths and get yourself grounded in the present moment and not all the worries that lie ahead helps you to rebalance and then deal with those harder things. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that?
No, well, yes, I think that's really great advice. I live in the woods, so that's easier for me than others probably to practice. And I do think that it's very restorative. We've, between last week and now, we have all recognized that this is probably going to last through the end of April, which gives us another 30 days of, social distancing, and it might even be longer than that. I saw a funny meme on social media that said, roses are red, violets are blue, April is gray, next time you'll see me is May. And so we really are thinking about a month long of, social distancing or not seeing folks. And so, what we're doing right now, Zoom, is very important. Getting on FaceTime with folks that are, important to you, and making sure that you're doing that is very helpful for those of us that are extroverted. And professionally as well, I think organizations were already moving towards distance meetings and that sort of thing, and we're being forced into that, and making sure that as an organization, you're giving folks face-to-face as much as possible, even virtually, is really important and really helps. So we at our company have been practicing this for the last 7 or 8 months. I'm on the West Coast. The rest of the team is on the East Coast. And although I am able to get over there frequently, it's very helpful for me to see folks' faces. And so doing that is very important. And it does make a difference, even if it's just on a screen. So that's very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. And I appreciate that we got a couple of other comments about our communication slide, and we will be elaborating on some of that next week. So we'll build from what we've done this week. Just moving to our last 2 slides. One is we wanted to commit to giving you some sort of inspiration. And I have to say, I'm looking back to the real hardships, all the books I've read and immersed myself in around World War II. And so for this week, we'll leave you with Winston Churchill's "Never give in, never give in, never, never." So I find that inspiring. And we'll go to one last slide, which just lets you know, here's how you can contact us, and we will be here again next week at 12 noon. Thank you so much for joining in, and I will use my other World War II. Keep calm and carry on. Thank you, everybody.
Yep, thanks.